It's time to talk about Las Vegas with Ira. Each week, Ira David Sternberg talks with the celebrities, entertainers, writers, and personalities who make Las Vegas the most exciting city in the world. And now, here's Ira.
Anything you want us to be, bring us your fantasy, LV.
My guest is Las Vegas-based comedian Lindsay Glazer, the second most famous comedian out of Peoria, Illinois. And we'll tell you who the first one is in a moment. But for everything about Lindsay Glazer, go to lindsayglazer.com. You can follow her on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And Lindsay, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Ira.
Absolutely. So the other comedian, I promised I would reveal it. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Sam Kinison.
Ooh, you're wrong. Sam Kinnison's from East Peoria. The most and that's my favorite thing is to correct people when I'm right and they're wrong. The most famous comedian from Peoria, Illinois is none other than Richard Pryor.
Excellent. I would not have remembered that. I should have. But I
Right?
didn't. So yes, you're right. You gave a tease in your information that Sam is in East Peoria, but I thought it was still going to be Sam, which is why I made a fool out of myself and said it. So that's good. I like that.
I like to trick people.
So you're a Midwestern female who became a lawyer before a comedian. Now, what possessed you, to become a lawyer, and then we'll get into what possessed you to become a comedian. So let's start with, obviously, the lawyer part.
Well, I never wanted to become a lawyer. I was a journalism major. I graduated early from Indiana University. And then my dad said what basically a lot of Jewish parents, there's an old street joke. This is not my joke, but this is an old street joke that a Jewish dad or mom says to her son, sweetie, you can be anything, honey, you can be anything you want when you grow up, any kind of doctor or lawyer you want. And so my dad was basically like, how about you go get a law degree? I'll pay for school. It's not going to hurt you either way. And so I did. I got into law school, and then I was like, okay, I guess even if I don't become a lawyer, a law school is good. But I hated law school itself. Like, I really hated it. I almost quit in the middle. But practicing law was great because I got to argue and prove. Basically, law, when you're litigating, is just proving yourself right and arguing with people. And there's another old Jewish joke that's basically like 10 Jews, 12 opinions in one room. So that's basically what law is.
What was it about law school that you didn't like particularly? Was it too dry or something?
No, it was just I think by the time, I didn't like college. I wasn't people always assume I was popular in college. I wasn't, because I was kind of like an old soul, and I liked academia, and I thought I was going to get to college and it was going to be about learning. I went to my high school. I went to a fancy dumb prep school, which I learned more at in high school than I did in college. And college was just about partying and drinking a lot and going out. And that wasn't my thing at all. I actually go out more in comedy than I ever did. So I got the school. I'm such a nerd. I got the school to grant. You were only allowed to take 18 credits, and you could only do that with special permission. I applied and got the school to give me permission to do 21 credits per semester and graduate an entire year early because I wanted to get out of college. I was that big of a nerd. And so I think by the time I got to law school, I was academically burnt out, and I didn't want to be a lawyer. And it's all just you know how guys talk about girls asking them hypotheticals, would you still love me if I was a worm or an inanimate object? Law school was that times 100, and it was those old math problems. If 4 people left the train station, and one was in Tokyo and one was in LA, and someone committed a tort. It was just I was already mentally tortured. And they're torturing you. And so I think that later, when I was practicing law as a litigator and there were stakes, you were really helping people. Now I liked it because it was practical and I could see the end result. Now I was burnt out as a litigator, but in law school, I was just it was just a who's who of how smart you are, arrogant people arguing, trying to overly competitive. What was the movie where they're look to the left and look to the right, and neither one of you won't be here. And it was like that. It was
I'm gonna take a stab. Maybe Paper Chase.
Paper Chase, yes.
Okay. Wow, I got one thing right. All right.
One thing right, 2 points.
Okay. Excellent. By the way, when you mentioned about going to that train and going to LA for the tort, I would imagine people eat torts in LA as opposed to just suing for torts. You know what I'm saying?
Well, only if they're vegan.
Yes,
But
of course.
I mean, if it was eating torts, that's spelled a different way, then I would have been a fan, T-O-R-T. But torts itself is like, if I stabbed Ira and he already had a heart condition, is he an HL plaintiff, or can he recover triple damages? Can you recover punitive damages? And what color was his hat? And I was like, what is happening?
So you get out of law school, you're bored of law school, but you enjoy the law, but so you still made a decision to become a comedian. Now, how did that happen? Where was that switch? And how did you explain it to friends, family, and potential lovers that, I have this high paying job as a lawyer, but I'm going to go on the road and stay at the comedy condo and all of that stuff. How did that all work?
Well, technically, I've been a comedian since I was about 10 years old. At the
Yes, no, there's no doubt you have a sense of humor, and I'm sure it started at a very early age. But somewhere in there, you decided professionally to do what so many people do, and so many people don't do well. That's the interesting thing, too. There's so many people that think they're comedians, and then when the road hits the rubber, or the rubber hits the road, or the comedian hits the road, and then they find out it's a whole different world.
My dad thinks he's a comedian. He leaves me voicemails telling me what to use in my act all the time. Technically, I come from a long line of theater people. My great-grandfather was Harry Ostrin, who was both the first lawyer in the country to get a wife alimony for the husband kissing another woman, and also the producer of Tobacco Road on Broadway. So it is genetic in my bloodline that we do law and theater, law and producing. But go ahead.
I was going to say, has your dad ever called you, besides giving you ideas for jokes, has he ever called you and asked for the money back that he paid for law school?
No, but he does ask me where his finder's fee is all the time. and my album, which is coming out, is called Thanks Dad. It's now, he doesn't know it sarcastically with a period. I let him make the exclamation mark.
When is that coming out?
It comes out April 14th. Actually, I produced it with Comedy Dynamics, and I'm very excited. I just approved the artwork yesterday, and it's my first one. And so I can say to my dad, look, it wasn't a total waste of money. Law helps me. It still helps me. I don't need an agent because I can read my own contract, so I don't have to give out my 20%. I don't need a manager because I'm not famous enough, but also because I can read my own contract. But I think so I was a litigator, right? I started the public defender's office. That is a performance-based skill. And here's the thing, you don't know this, but there was a study done, a scientific peer-reviewed study done, that the more laughs per minute you got in voir dire, which is jury selection, the more likely you were to win a case, even if that case was a murder death penalty case. So it is a similar performance skill.
Right.
As you know, Ira, you're Jew. All jobs are sales jobs. You sell laughter to an audience, not guilty verdicts to a jury. You sell entertainment to an audience. Everything's sales.
Unless you have a jury of anti-Semites, then you have a problem, even with the humor.
I heard someone say on the radio the other day that all people are just shysters, and I was like, oh, okay.
Well,
my ex-husband actually called up and told the radio, hey, you can't say that.
How did you end up in Las Vegas? Now wait, I want to stay with, okay, so you decided to, I'll try and keep it on track here, because it's interesting how you presented some of this material. When you made the decision, though, you had to tell everybody, right? And then you had to start out, I assume, from scratch. And were they supportive? Were they?
So surprisingly, my dad, when I was in school, in college, I told him I was going to be an English major. And for some reason, he thought journalism was more practical and made me major in journalism, even though English professors make $45,000 and journalists make $12,000 in the beginning. Right. But my grandfather a long time ago said we needed a comic in the family. So my dad was very supportive, surprisingly, from the beginning. But I also didn't just quit my job and start comedy. I kept my day job, did open mics, and kept doing it. Now, I absolutely had an advantage because I could take a lot more losses up front, which meant I could drive 5 hours for a guest spot on the weekend and pay for my own hotel room, which meant I got to 10,000 hours faster than someone who can't do that. So there were definitely advantages I had from being a lawyer, but also there were disadvantages because people couldn't relate to me. I don't know if you ever saw 30 Rock, but did you ever see that show?
Yeah,
I've never really seen it, but I just saw this clip, and Alex Baldwin is telling Tracy Morgan, that he's no longer relatable to the common audience anymore. It's like, what are you talking about? And then it flashes to Tracy Morgan doing like stand-up comedy. He's like, you know, when you're on your private plane and you fly to your private island and you're eating lobster like this, and like everyone's just silent. That's how it was for me, but like with less of an extreme. I obviously didn't have private jet or anything like that, but I had like a paying day job. I wasn't like, you know how it is when you're on the Greyhound bus. Like I wasn't doing that.
No, no, you were driving and flying in comfort. You mentioned about the 10,000 hours. So for our audience, explain what I know what that is, but many people may not know what that reference is to.
So 10,000 hours is a Malcolm Gladwell thing from his book, The Tipping Point, which talks about to be an expert in anything, you need 10,000 hours. And to get to 10,000 hours, I was just lucky. Well, first off, I lived in Fort Lauderdale, which at the time didn't have an improv, but I was still able to get up 5 times a night at decent open mics. And I used to drive. It's the other thing. I could pay for gas to drive 2 hours away to Fort Myers to a club called Laugh-In. And the owner there, Brian Corion, was really good to me and would give me like 5-minute guest spots, let me host, and would do that stuff. So I really like, he's really the reason I got ahead faster, because he was willing to do that. And I was able to afford to drive the 2 hours. So let's make no mistake about it. I had some privilege that other people didn't have.
No, it's a nicer way to do it. So yeah, that makes perfect sense. Did you end up having to occasionally buy other comedians on the road food?
Yeah. So, well, not food. Food. Most comic clubs are pretty good about giving you like free food or food, but like Pat Garrity is a guy who took me on the road early on. I definitely helped him out with gas money and stuff like that, because I had a paying, stable job, and he was living fully off of comedy, and I was grateful. And some people like, oh, you paid him all. I'm like, no, I just paid for gas because I could afford. You know, it was what gas, or we took in most cases, we actually just took my car, because his car. So I paid for gas anyways, because his car was like a rundown beaten thing with like no air conditioning.
Right.
Sometimes we had to take his car because he had people sign his car. And so he was headlining. And Pat Garrity was very good about only like when I was like, hey, can I feature? He's like, no, you're not ready. And he's like, and because he was very good, he goes in, because people are already saying that we're sleeping together, I need to make sure that you are like extra ready when I recommend you for feature, so no one can say it. He was good. He protected me. And other guys I worked with too. Pat Garrity's just the main one I worked with. Right. But other guy comics protected me too, where they actually said it's better for you if you host even longer. So when we do recommend you, no one can say, oh, she's not really ready, and just spread a bunch of rumor, which happens to all female comics. Right. I am certainly not the only one. I'm not even the only one in Vegas. So
well, it's handy that you're a lawyer, because you can sue for slander.
Yes. So that's interesting you bring that up, because I had heard some stuff about me on a podcast here called Nobody Likes Onions, that is for entertainment purposes only. And like, if I wanted to, I guess I could say some stuff about slander, but honestly, it wouldn't be worth it.
Yeah, it's still, even if you're a lawyer, it still takes a lot of time and effort.
It takes time and money, and my rate's $300 an hour.
Yeah, no, exactly. Thank God you're not charging me for this.
Or maybe right? I thought about it, but yeah. I was like,
God.
And I was just excited to be with you. I was like, Ira Steinberg is the only other Jew I know in Las Vegas now.
Well, now it's Sternberg, but you're close.
Sternberg. See, now I had to get one wrong too, to make you feel better about your mistake about Sam Kinison.
That's true. I was going to sue you for slander by calling me Steinberg instead of Sternberg, right? But the cost and just it's too much time and trouble.
It's the mental. It's not the cost. It's the labor.
Now, you mentioned Las Vegas. So how did you end up? You're on the road. You're traveling around with Pat and other comedians. You're putting in your 10,000 hours. You're appearing on television shows. You've got an album coming out in April called, again, it's
Thanks,
called
Dad, with a period, not an exclamation.
Period. Always a period. And you somehow end up based in Las Vegas, as I introduced you. So how did that happen?
So the way that happened is I moved to Los Angeles because we lost our house in a hurricane in Fort Lauderdale. This was a very big news story. You can Google it. I lived at Scottie Pippen's house temporarily during that time. I ended up moving to Los Angeles because my family was in Santa Barbara, and I knew Los Angeles would be close enough to them that I could see them, but also far enough away my dad couldn't stop by unannounced. That happened. It would still happen if I lived there. He stops at my sister's house all the time under the pretense of bringing donuts.
Of course. That's what they do.
Right. And then, but also I would see them and be close enough to an airport. I'm probably the one.
Wait a minute. Donuts, not bagels?
Donuts. My dad has a sweet tooth.
Okay.
Also, there are no good bagels in California, Ira. You should know that. And I was close enough to the airport. I'm probably the only comic who didn't move to Los Angeles for comedy. To me, you move to Los Angeles for comedy and you get work. I know so many good comics who moved to Los Angeles and got worse because they could only get 5-10 minutes. I stayed on the road because then you get the hour. You can't move to Los Angeles and still have an hour when you're being bumped by Leslie Jones every night.
Right.
And who I love, and I am totally excited when I get
Yeah, but you don't want to be bumped. Come on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you have to, comedy, even Seinfeld says comedy is a muscle like anything else. And Seinfeld even said, if he doesn't get up 5 times a night, you feel rusty. And in Zoom, I was so rusty, and the pandemic happened. I was living in Los Angeles, and the pandemic happened. And I was like, why am I paying all this money for rent? I'm a Jew. This is stupid. We're not even able to go outside or go anywhere. And my dad, after he tried to retire 15 times, he can't retire. Everyone in our family is type A. We have to have like 17 jobs. I remember when I was in Miami, my friend whose dad was Israeli, he's like, are you secretly Jamaican? Because Jamaicans like traditionally have a lot of different jobs. And I'm like, my dad tried to retire and then became a professional poker player. Like, he's been playing poker and crap since I was 5 years old.
Right.
He used to come visit here. Like, we used to stay at the Desert Inn before they tore it down because my dad liked the non-smoking casino.
Right.
And then eventually we stayed at the Bellagio. So we were coming here before he even became a poker guy. We would come here a lot. We'd play craps. He'd rent the table. He'd play craps all the time. He eventually learned poker. He played in all these tournaments. He played in the what's it called? The World Series, the 5-star Diamond Bellagio tournament. He's played in all those tournaments. So then I was like, where's their cheap property that I'm not going to pay a ridiculous amount of rent that's still good for comedy? And I've been hearing about Las Vegas for 5 years. And frankly, I should have. The smart Jewish money move would have been to move to Las Vegas instead of Los Angeles. But I don't know. At the time, I thought the Jewish community was better in LA. It would be sunnier. And I don't know what I thought. I honestly don't know. It was a blur because at the time we had moved like 9 times, then lived in Pippin's house. We lost our house in a hurricane. In the middle of that, my husband and I were starting to get separated. And then the pandemic happened. And then it was just a very crazy sort of 5 years. Like my daughter, this is not funny at all, but my daughter had like the markers of like PTSD, like or before she lost her house in a natural disaster, moved like 9 times, parents, all her like stability. So I was just like, where can we go that we're never going to move again, that isn't too cold? I didn't know that Vegas was going to be cold in the winter. I'm so angry that I didn't know that. And it snowed this year.
Lawyers do research, don't they?
Yeah, but I did. And I was like, okay, it's cool in the winter, but I didn't know it was going to like snow. That's like, obviously.
That doesn't happen every year. So, yeah. But
so
people listen and watch us from all over the world. So that's why I wanted your take on Vegas for people not only here in Las Vegas, but elsewhere to understand what drove you here. And so you're based here now, and yet you're able to travel and do things all over the place because it's a natural. We have an international airport here, obviously, and you can even fly to Santa Barbara has an airport. You can fly to see your dad and bring him donuts.
I mostly drive to Santa Barbara because I don't want to go they don't have that many direct flights from Las Vegas to Santa Barbara other than Southwest, which is fine, but they're just not at the time. But I drive to my dad. I see him more now here. I know I got sidetracked. Good job keeping me focused. I haven't taken Ritalin yet.
No, I'll keep you focused. Don't worry.
My dad, I see him now more, my family more now than I did in LA. I love living in Las Vegas. I'm going to be here the rest of my life. It's a fantastic city. People think it's all about the Strip. It's really not. The Strip is its own thing, but it's one of the fastest growing Jewish populations in the country. It's got it's got horrible public schools, but good private schools.
They'll be upset to hear that from you, but go ahead.
Who will be, Nevada? It's not my fault they're ranked worst in the country.
No, the school district will be, not Nevada.
I'm sorry, Clark County, but if you type it into Google, now Clark County, what's interesting about that is Clark County has some really great services for kids who have autism and ADD and things like that.
Perfect for you.
Perfect for me, right? Which are better than a lot of other places, but they are still technically ranked last in the country in education, which is why I sent my still to private school. But there are plenty of people who went to public school. I think Jill Kimmel grew up here. She went to public school here and then the art school and high school. Right. That means that Jimmy Kimmel did too. So they're doing great. They obviously are fine.
You do get off topic, don't you?
I'm sorry. I try not to get off topic. It's the Zoom thing. I'm looking at the green light, trying to answer why we were in Las Vegas. You told me Clark County is going to be mad at me, and now I'm worried they're going to sue me for slander, even though what I said is easily Googleable.
I just thought here's a segue. It's a totally disconnected segue. And that is if you added an I to your name, you could be fitting glass into windows and doors. What do you think about that?
What do you mean? Glazer eye?
Glazier instead of Glazer.
Oh, that's true. I mean, my last name is originally a shortened Russian made up name for Ellis Island.
Well, for our audience that may not have gotten that awful joke, instead of Glazer, it's Glazier. That's where I was going with that. It obviously fell flat, but I can live with it.
But no, but also Glazer is the shortened Russian word for glassmaker. My family was glassmakers.
Oh, so it's a double
Russia.
meaning. That's good. I like that.
See,
Yeah.
I am off topic. You told me this was a conversation, not a focused shtick thing. That's how I talk normally in real life.
Now, here's the irony. Your album coming up in April is called Thanks Dad, period. But when you speak, there are no periods.
That's right. There's just commas and ellipses.
Not even no, it's just a continual run on.
I'm
Which
sorry.
It's fine. It's very East Coast. And it's funny because you were born in Peoria and grew up, but yeah, it's very East Coast. I like that.
Well, but my grandparents were from Manhattan on my dad's.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
This jacket's from Greenwich.
When you started writing comedy and performing comedy, was there one person you modeled yourself after, or at least looked to for inspiration, or any of that?
Not like that. But I just tried to like watch people and like how many laughs they were getting per second and seeing like the pacing. I watched like Gary Goldman a lot. People always ask me this and I never remember. Maria Bamford's amazing for like, Maria Bamford is a good person to watch if you have no periods in your DC Benny is great. I mean, DC Benny and I are close friends, mostly because I didn't know who he was and I didn't know he was famous. And I met him in Miami in an open mic.
But did you go to anybody and say, hey, I'd like some advice on how to set this up right, whether it's the writing, the structure, the performing, the moves, any of that kind of stuff?
Pat Garrity, who's not famous, who I worked with on the road. Here's the thing. A lot of people get taken on the road and they just get stage time. Pat Garrity took me on the road, but he didn't just give me stage time. He sat, he watched my set, he gave me advice, he gave me tags, he helped me with pacing, he did all of that. There's a very big difference between having a mentor who just says, drive me to my set and, sits in the back and, does cocaine or pot in the green room and doesn't watch you, and a mentor who actually watches you. So both DC Benny and Pat were very good at like helping me with that sort of thing. Susan Jones, now when I have something I want watched, I ask Susan Jones here in town. Jay Devon is another person in town who I would ask if I'm like, hey, what do you think of this? Or like, what do you think of this tag? All comics are lying if they say they don't ask like other comics for help. We all tell each other tags, etc., like that.
Right. Do you see your life on the road for the next 5-10 years? Do you want to do?
God, I hope
not. Maybe just limit it to temples and synagogues, and that way you can at least be in a whole different world. But do you want to do movies, television? Do you want to write a book? I know the album, and we keep mentioning the album, which I don't mind. It's coming out in April. It's called Thanks Dad with a period, not a comma, and now an exclamation point.
I actually did write a book. It's not out yet. I'm working on whether I want to self-publish or publish with a lit agent. It's called Are We Fucking Zen Yet? It's called, I'm sorry, Am I Fucking Zen Yet? The answer is no periods. And I would like to have that book published, and I'd eventually like to be a writer or staff writer on a TV show. I've written a couple pilots. I do some radio here, but I would like to not be on the road for the next 5 to 10 years. I moved to Vegas for that dual purpose of it's a good family, Jewish town, and comedy because there's a lot of clubs. But here's the thing about Las Vegas. There are not a ton of like good open mics. I don't want to get in trouble here. There's only very few open mics that have like real audiences. Wise Guys has an open mic on Tuesday and Wednesday that is not made up of just comics or people drunk at a bar that you can go work out stuff at. Other than that, there are a lot of clubs, but here's the thing. You can't do those clubs every week unless you're just like hosting or whatever. So it's not as, and you're competing with people like George Wallace, Carrot Top, and Brian Regan and everyone who's like Brad Garrett is coming over here. So you have to still stay on the road to still do an hour all the time, right? I've headlined Wise Guys twice this year, and that's more than normal because when you headline something, it's supposed to be 12 to 18 months in between. The only reason I happened to headline Wise Guys twice is I taped my album there in December after I headlined in August to run the album for the weekend. So no, please, if you are listening, Comedy Cellar, Brad Garrett's, all those clubs, everything, I would love to not be on the road for 5 to 10 years. Like at that point, I'll just buy a small, black box theater here and run my own stuff. Ira, you have any leads there? You know,
Yeah, I may have one or two for you. Yeah, I may have one or two for you. There's a lot of little rooms opening up that are fascinating in terms of around town. And as you say, a lot of the stuff that goes on is not on the Strip or downtown. It's out in the suburbs and other cities within Clark County. And it's great because that kind of culture is expanding. It's not just comedy, it's jazz, all kinds of music. And so, it could very well be that I could see it, Lindsay's opening up right on Eastern. Well, no, we want to have you on the other side of town. So right on, I would say, Buffalo. Yeah, we'll do Buffalo. Yeah.
I don't know if Summerlin would support comedy. Like I could do comedy in my country club at TPC, but every time there's a Summerlin room, it closes down because people are older with kids in suburbs, so they can't go out on a Thursday night, or they don't want to because they're older. We'll see though. We'll
see. We have a couple of minutes left. Let's talk a little bit about your daughter. Not a lot, but I like the fact that you are inspired by her, and you're a single mom and you're working hard. How does that work in terms of the daughter-mother relationship? Is it a strong one?
It's very strong. It's hard because she doesn't like when I travel. So when I'm like home, it's a very condensed time. I don't think I've slept alone in my bed for like 4 years. She sleeps with me when I'm at home, which is fair because I'm gone a lot. But I wanted to like teach her that you can follow your dreams. You don't have to do what like your, traditional Jewish parents think you should do. She tells me it's not fair. She can't see my comedy because all my comedy is about her, which is true. And I'm very, very lucky. I have a decent relationship with my ex. We have no court issues. We solved all the money. It probably helps that I was the lawyer and so were his family. His family were actually divorce lawyers. So we knew that the only people who get the money if we go to court are the lawyers. So we'd rather the money go to the kid. So we knew that. We didn't even use a mediator. We work it out on our own, and we're lucky that our families can be in the same room. So like we can have a Thanksgiving together if we want.
Yeah, no, that's great. Your album that you mentioned is coming out in April, called Thanks Dad, period. Is it when you taped it, was it also video that you taped, or was it I say tape, but it recorded digitally, I'm sure. Was it video as well as audio, or just audio?
We just professionally did the audio. I mean, I videotaped it for myself so we could later promo clips, but it's just a comedy album, like audio only. So you'll hear it on iTunes, Spotify, Weezer, I guess, or Deezer. Not Weezer. Deezer is the music thing, all that stuff. Okay. So that's how I know.
And how do you keep yourself busy besides all of that? Because I know.
Ooh, that's enough. I mean, I'm working on throwing an album release party right now. Fingers crossed. It'll be a Crazy Horse. What's it called? Crazy Horse or Wild Horse? I always forget.
Well, there's a Crazy Horse. There's a Crazy Horse 2. I think Crazy Horse 2 is not around anymore. I may be wrong, but we'll see how it works.
We'll either be there. I'm trying to throw the album party. I leave tomorrow for gigs on the East Coast. I come back and then I leave again for Canada for 2 weeks. And that's my first time doing Canada. And then in the meantime, I try and write a bunch of like sitcoms and TV pilots, because I know once you get an agent, they go, that's cute. You've been doing stand-up comedy for a while. What else do you have? And then I'll hand them a binder full of 3 pilots, 3 night packets, and a book. Go, just this.
Well, that's a great way to end it. My guest has been comedian Lindsay Glazer.
No periods.
No periods. For everything about Lindsay Glazer, that's Glazer. You go to lindsayglazer.com and you can follow her on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And I'll be sitting by the door waiting for my donuts. Lindsay, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
See you next time.
You've been listening to Talk About Las Vegas with Ira. Each week, Ira David Sternberg talks with the celebrities, entertainers, writers, and personalities who make Las Vegas the most exciting city in the world.
Las Vegas.